Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the hidden psychological forces that shape our political world. I mean, have you ever wondered why political debates can feel so illogical, so disconnected from the facts? Well, the answer might just be hiding in some fascinating and maybe slightly unsettling corners of behavioral science. And our story actually starts in a pretty unexpected place, with a Nobel Prize in economics. Back in 2017, a guy named Richard Thaler got the award for his life's work, which was all built around one single groundbreaking idea that kind of turns our whole concept of human decision-making on its head. And what was that big idea? It's this. We are not the perfectly rational, logical beings that classic economics assumed we were. Not even close. We make mistakes in our judgment all the time. But, and this is the kicker, our irrationality isn't random. It follows predictable patterns. In other words, we are predictably irrational. So that raises a pretty massive question, doesn't it? If we're systematically irrational when we're deciding what to buy at the grocery store, what on earth happens when we step into the voting booth? What does all this predictable irrationality mean for the very foundation of democracy? Okay, let's start with our first clue. And it's all about a really powerful and often subconscious force, our super intense, emotional attachment to the things that we already consider mine. Right at the heart of this is a concept called loss aversion. What behavioral scientists have found over and over again is that for most of us, the psychological pain of losing something feels about twice as strong as the pleasure of gaining that exact same thing. It's like our brains are hardwired to play defense, to avoid losses more than they hunt for gains. And you can really see it here. This chart just lays it all out. The pain bar is literally double the pleasure bar. This is a map of our emotional landscape. And what it tells us is that a threat to something we already have will always feel way more urgent and potent than a promise of something new. And this emotional wiring has huge implications for politics. Just look at these two messages. Protect your pensions. That hits you right in the gut. It's an alarm bell that triggers our deep-seated fear of loss. But improve the pension system? Well, that's just a potential future gain. It's nice, but it just doesn't have the same emotional punch. This is why it's often so much easier to get people fired up to protect the status quo than to get them excited about change, even when that change could be a good thing. Now, this is closely related to something called the endowment effect. In these classic experiments, researchers would give one group of people a simple coffee mug. And what they found was that the people who were given the mug suddenly demanded a much higher price to sell it than other people were willing to pay to buy the exact same one. Just owning it for even a few minutes made it feel more valuable. In politics, this means we can overvalue our current systems or our identity as a voter, not because they're objectively better, but just because they're already ours. All right, let's move on to our next set of clues. Now we're going to look at the mental traps that have to do with time and effort and see how our kind of weird perception of them can completely derail rational policymaking. First up, the sunk cost fallacy. You know this feeling. You've poured so much time, money, or energy into a project. You can see it's not working out, but you just keep going, don't you? You tell yourself, I've come this far, I can't back out now. Well, that's the sunk cost fallacy in action, when stopping feels more painful than continuing down a failing path. And this kind of thinking gets magnified on a massive scale in public policy. Just listen to this quote. It's a really powerful example. The argument to continue isn't based on a rational analysis of what will work in the future. It's an emotional appeal to honor the sacrifices of the past. And that makes it incredibly difficult to change course, because doing so feels like admitting those initial investments were a waste. And then there's our brain's completely broken internal clock. It's a bias called hyperbolic discounting. And what it means, basically, is that our brains are junkies for immediate gratification. We want that smaller reward right now, way more than we want a much bigger reward later on. The gap between today and tomorrow feels enormous, but the gap between a year from now and a year and 1 day from now, it feels tiny. And you can see how this makes certain policies almost irresistible, right? A tax cut gives you an immediate, real benefit in your wallet. The cost, a huge deficit way down the line, feels distant and abstract. Putting off climate action avoids short-term costs for a long-term problem. This bias creates this powerful political incentive to offer short-term goodies, even if it leads to long-term pain for everyone. Okay, so we've looked at the glitches in our own individual thinking. But we're not just individuals, are we? We are deeply social creatures. So let's zoom out and see what happens when our very social nature gets tangled up in politics. You know, a modern political rally isn't just a speech, it's a full-on sensory experience. The music, the lights, the call and response chants, the energy of the crowd, it is all carefully designed to create a shared emotional state, to get thousands of people to feel the same thing at the same time. The goal isn't just to share facts, it's to make you feel that sense of conviction and belonging. This leads us straight into one of the wildest paradoxes in all of psychology, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Essentially, the research found that in many areas, the people with the least amount of knowledge are often the most confident in their own expertise. And why is that? Because the very skills you need to be good at something are the same skills you need to recognize how bad you are at it. Now, think about what that means for politics. It's staggering. It means the citizens who know the absolute least about a really complicated topic, say fiscal policy, can be the most certain that they have the simple, correct answer. And this false confidence makes them incredibly resistant to any new information that might challenge their view. And finally, there's cognitive dissonance. This is that cringy, uncomfortable feeling you get when you're faced with a fact that directly contradicts one of your core beliefs. We hate that feeling. Our brains will do almost anything to resolve that tension. And when a hard fact clashes with a belief that's tied to our political tribe, well, it's often psychologically easier to just reject the fact than it is to question our identity. So after digging through all of these bugs in our political thinking, loss aversion, sunk costs, groupthink, it is really easy to feel a bit pessimistic. I mean, is a rational democracy even possible if our brains are this glitchy? But here's the thing. The answer isn't to just give up. The goal was never to create perfectly rational citizens. That's a fantasy. The real goal is to be smart and realistic about our limitations. It's about building and strengthening the institutions that act as our guardrails, things like a robust free press, strong civic education, and checks and balances that can buffer us from our own worst biases. And while we're working on those big systems, we can also work on ourselves. It's about practicing a little epistemic hygiene. Just getting in the habit of asking ourselves some tough questions, like, wait a minute, am I supporting this policy because it's a good idea or just because it's what my team believes? Or am I reacting out of a real fear of loss here? Is my certainty coming from deep analysis or is it just being echoed back to me by my social circle? And this leaves us with one final big idea. Understanding all these cognitive bugs isn't a reason for despair. It's a diagnostic tool. It's like we finally have the user manual for our own minds. So now that we know where the flaws are, the real work begins. How do we use this knowledge to build a smarter, more resilient, and more clear-eyed democracy? That's the challenge in front of all of us.